All right, guys, it's Don again. I'm out here in the garage, my favorite place to talk to you. And of course, I've got the Jeep project right here. If you can't really see it all that well, I'm sorry, but it is looking fine. It needs a little buffing and polishing, but I'm feeling pretty good about where we're at with the paint job now. Out in the driveway over there, we've got the Santana 22. We're redoing the top where we fixed up our balsa coring that was rotted last season. We cut that out, we repaired it, did not repair it fine. It didn't survive very well, so I had to redo some of that. It's coming along pretty well. So I'm gonna kind of bring you up to speed on where we're at with all the stuff, and then I've got a little work to do out there. So let's bring you up to speed on where we're at. Okay, well, the one thing I have learned, if I've learned anything about doing all these do-it-yourself restoration projects, is you're going to do a lot of sanding if you take on a project like this. So I have gone through these little flexible sanding pads. This is a 1500 grit one. This will be for wet sanding the paint on the Jeep. I've got a plain old sanding block here with a piece of, I think it's 320 grit, which happens to be stuck to it right now. Indeed, 320 grit. And I had a piece of 80 grit off my orbital sander that's up on the boat right now in Seattle, but I was using a piece of that just on the block here. Been using that to do some sanding. I've got rolls of sandpaper, 400 grit, 320 grit. I've got sandpaper over there in the little box I put on top of my compressor. 1500 grit, 2000 grit, 3000 grit, you name it. I have got sanding materials, because what I've found is the most work that you do on these kinds of things, especially if you're painting or you're doing epoxy and fiberglass, is you're going to sand your brains out. So where the Santana is I've taken my Easy Fair lightweight epoxy fairing compound, and being epoxy, you have obviously your material and your catalyst here. So you have the big can, little can, use twice as much of this to one part of that, 2 parts, 1 part. Hope that makes sense. I'm sure it does. You mix this group together, and it's kind of like Bondo when you're working on the Jeep. Slather that on there. You try to get it on as smooth as you can, but it's never very smooth. And then you go after it with the sandpaper, and you sand and you sand and you sand and you sand. So that's where we're at out there on the sailboat. That top deck has been faired. That fairing compound has completely cured. So we're going to jump up there, take the high spots down, do that first pass of cleaning that up, and see where we're at. Because I'm sure some of this fairing compound will have to be reapplied to the low points or the places where I still have some of that heavy fiberglass mat showing through. So I got to get that pretty much prepped and ready to go. My plan is to hopefully, I'll just be real, I'm not going to make it. I was going to try to get a coat of primer on top of that stuff. Now the fairing compound, this stuff, is waterproof when it's cured. And if you recall, what we did on the top of the Santana is we laid down the fiberglass mat, we laid down the thinner fiberglass over the top of that, and then I sanded all of the bumpy stuff off of there, the hairs that were sticking up and so forth, and then I went up there with a roller and I rolled a fresh coat of epoxy over the whole entire front of the boat, just a sealer coat. And then I started in with my fairing compound over that. So that boat is waterproof now. I'm pretty sure that it's going to stand up to Seattle weather if I get up there to Seattle. However, I did order my epoxy primer from West Marine, and it got here. So this is, I'm sure it will be the same thing or a similar thing. It will be 2-part epoxy primer. But we're getting pretty close to our trip to the north, and I'm not going to get that primer laid down before we go. So I'm going to try to get some sanding done, get it down to where at least know what's in front of me. Possibly I'll get some of the fairing compound put back down on the low places and so forth, so that can cure while we're gone. But that's all we're going to get done, because I've got to get the truck loaded up, you know, kind of get ready for our big trip here. So that's bearing down on us, and we'll be heading out pretty soon to go see Randy up there in Wyoming, and then we're going to go up to Glacier, and we're going to go over to the Pacific Northwest, and we're just going to go until we're tired of traveling. So let's do some more sanding, and I'll try not to show you too much of it, because if you're as bored of it as I am, you're going to be like, come on, Don, show us something exciting. But it's got to be done, and you know what? This is the part of the work. While it's tedious and it's boring and it's your hands get numb and it's not to be recommended. Okay, for a good time, do not do a bunch of sanding. But I will tell you that what I've learned from the results that I have gotten with the Jeep, and what I've learned now from doing that up there and being at it the second time, is it's really all about the prep work. And so the sanding is the price you have to pay to get the good result at the end. So it's worth it. It's just, you know, it's not adding any days to the end of my life. It's scraping some off the end of my life, I think. But every day I spend sanding is probably one day I'm closer to that hole in the ground. But it's got to be done, so let's go do it. All right, guys, well, here I am. I'm getting ready to head to Montana. I think I mentioned Gray and I are taking some vacation time. So I am out here in the driveway, and I've got the truck pretty much loaded. I've got it plugged into, I'll call it shore power here. We've got an extension cord going in the back, which is running our ARB refrigerator there, keeping it all nice and good. We're pretty much loaded up. A couple more things to throw in, but for the most part, ready to go. But this boat's what we need to talk about right now. I'm trying to figure out if I'm at a good spot to leave it, or if I need to, I got a couple hours before it gets dark, I might put a little more fairing compound up there. Now, if I do, I am going to switch tools. I'm going to go get some of my drywall knives and either try my 6-inch or my 8-inch wide knife and see if as I'm skimming this last bit down, I can skim it really tight and thin and smooth, because as with all this stuff, the smoother it is to begin with, the less sanding you have to do. And I'm trying to minimize the sanding at this point. So I'm going to have a look at that and see what it looks like, and we'll go from there. All right, through the magic of time-lapse photography, we sped through that last little bit. I had about 2 workable batches of fairing compound left over in the can. Not very much. I thought I would have enough to skim a layer on everything. I did not. I did go out there with my 8-inch drywall knife. Now I feel way more competent with one of these in my hands because, as you can see, well, I don't know if you can really tell, but I've hung on to this thing for quite some time. That's, again, what I worked my way through college and all that was doing drywall. So I was able to, now that I'm kind of going down over existing fairing compound, it is a little easier to really skim, thin layer in there and get it a little smoother. It's not quite like working with drywall. When you're working with tape and mud, you kind of, as you come back into your mud, you kind of moisten up the stuff that's on your knife, and so you don't get little dry pieces and so forth. This stuff being epoxy, where it's got an activator there, the activator's drying the compound as it goes, so you don't really have any control over keeping it moist. So it's a little bit different animal working with. You have to kind of figure out, work a little faster and just, I guess, deal with some little, what happens is you get a little hard piece on your knife. As you go, it leaves a little trough in there. Or you get what we called icicles, where you get a little bit of the compound on the back side of the blade. And so then that's leaving a little stringer, or a little icicle, we used to call them, behind you on top of your nice flat surface. So there will still be some sanding to be done, and I ran out of compound, so I'm completely out. I didn't really get over everything. I got over a fair amount of it, but I still have some stuff as I'm looking around up there. I'm like, I need some more. So I don't know. I'm going to go have a vacation, and then I'm going to decide if it's time to order one more little quart of the fairing compound. I probably am just going to go order a quart because there's no sense fighting it. I've got my primer here. It's epoxy primer. It's going to be really good primer when I put it down. So just like I keep saying over and over and over, pay your dues, man. Do the prep work. So I'm not going to argue with myself. I'm just going to go right now before I can even think about it. I'm going to order me one more batch of the fairing compound so that when I get back to Salt Lake, I can get up there and finish skimming a thin coat over it and getting it sanded down. I'll be working in thin layers now, so it won't have to take much off. But I'm sure as I go, I'll identify a few more low spots and high spots and this and that. So might as well just have enough to do the job right? That's what I'm gonna do. So anyway, for right now, I'm not gonna do anything else because I'm out of goo. And as I mentioned, in the morning, tomorrow morning, we're jumping in the Tacoma. We're going to see Randy. And then once we're done seeing Randy, then we're going to go see Glacier. When we're done seeing Glacier, we're going to go kick around in the Cascades. And when we're done kicking around in the Cascades, then we might go to some islands like San Juan Island, Orcas Island, maybe. Maybe we'll get on the boat. I don't really know. But we're going to go have a roving, nomadic camping trip. And so I think it's time to get started on that. We'll bring you along. We'll film a little of it. I know a lot of folks on this that watch this channel, some of you are only here for the Jeep stuff, and I get it, and others say, hey, we don't mind seeing some other stuff mixed in there. So those of you who only want to see the Jeep stuff, stick with me because we're getting to the pretty part now of the Jeep. It's going to start looking really, really good. Every time, in fact, when I'm standing out here in the garage, I can't keep my eyes off it because I'll just say it. I feel pretty dang proud of this thing now. I feel like I did a good job. And as I'm looking right down here at my possessed hell place right there behind the driver or the passenger side door, you see that shiny reflective part right there? It's smooth and flat. And I think when the light is shining down it, it's going to look smooth and flat. And remember, I've spent hours putting little thin coats of Bondo on there, sanding them down, filling in low spots, sanding them down. Now as I look at that, there's the payoff. It was worth it. So that's my reminder to not cut the corners on the boat. I'll be at the same thing every time I'm out there sailing around on a thing. I'll be looking at the front of the boat and I'll be either seeing a really nice looking job or I'll be identifying and seeing and never able to unsee all the flaws. So there we go. There's our life lesson for today. Do the prep work, man. How many times have I said that? Just do the prep work and the final result will be worth it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to order me some more compound. I'm going to keep skimming and sanding and skimming and sanding until that looks really good. Then I'm going to do a great job of laying down my my epoxy primer. Then we're going to paint that thing and be done with it. So for now, thanks for watching and let's go to Montana, should we?